Hello, Jeando.
Hello, Kevin.
Hi. So let's continue what we were discussing last week about the primary control. So over to you.
Yes, I just want to
And
come back to this. The main thing is that very early in the use of the self, the third book of Alexander, where he retraces his experiments, is well very plainly explaining what his thinking is. And from there, I extracted my vision, my understanding of the term that is very well known in the in the modern Alexander technique, that is primary control. And I want to explain once again what is the difference between the initial Alexander technique that I teach and the modern Alexander technique that you see more or less everywhere else in the world. Yes. So what Alexander started with is a problem of functioning of the vocal organs. And he first thought that the functioning of these organs of speech was influenced mainly by the adjustment of the movement of the head and neck. That was his starting, it really is a starting point. And that's where the difficulty in reading Alexander comes in, is that you may take an excerpt from the book and make it a rule. Instead of reading the whole passage, instead of reading the whole chapter, and in fact recollecting the different parts of the chapter and the process by which Alexander brings about his principle. That's what I call construction of a principle. Very often people do not care about constructing the principle. What they want is simple statements, simple tricks. So the simple tricks is the primary control is allowing the correct use between the head and neck. Well, Alexander says that, he discovered that the functioning of the organs of speech was influenced by his manner of using the whole torso. And to arrive at that conclusion, he says that every time he was pulling his neck and pulling the head back, this was associated with an act of shortening the stature. Well, of course, you may imagine that when you pull the head back, you're shortening your stature. But there is another meaning in this, is that the manner of using the whole torso is where we measure the reduction in stature. It's not in the above compartment where the neck and head are that we measure. It's as if I only measure the torso from the chair on which I'm sitting right to, well, the first thoracic vertebrae, where the real torso is starting. Above that, you have the neck and head. I do not consider this part. The manner of using the whole torso is considered. And he says it was useless, absolutely useless to expect the improvement that he needed. So he needed some improvement somewhere in order to free the voice mechanism. And he said it was absolutely useless to expect some improvement by merely preventing the wrong use of the head and neck. So I must repeat that because my whole training in the modern Alexander technique was that any conditions, any pathological condition of wrong use was a consequence of the head and neck organization according to my teachers. This is in absolute contradiction with what Alexander is saying here. So, of course, when you happen to discover a contradiction like this, it's not my point to say, well, the teachers are incorrect and Alexander is. No, the starting point is to think, okay, we need to experiment. What is going to lead to improvements? Is it that the modern teachers discovered something that Alexander missed? Or did they, in fact, mistakenly, because of the way they were trained, did they confuse the issue? And in fact, by thinking that the simple trick of directing the head and neck or stopping the interference with the head and neck was sufficient. So this is what Alexander was as saying. He said, I realized I must also prevent those other associated wrong uses which brought about the shortening of the stature. And I translate by the shortening of the torso. So when I watch pictures of Alexander, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking at him as a savior. No, I'm looking at somebody that has gone through that type of reasoning, has invented a technique for himself first. Not a technique where he manipulates the pupils into what he feels is the correct use. No, he started with himself, by himself, using verbal instructions, how to prevent the other associated wrong uses of the different parts of the mechanism. Well, summing up, he says, instead of just looking at two parts, the relationship between the neck and head, well, you have to, in fact, have a much broader view and see how the different mechanisms, the torso mechanism, the arms, the limbs mechanism, and the neck and head mechanism are, well, actually organized together. And remember, Alexander used mirrors. So if he used mirrors, there is no reason why we should not look at his own way of presenting himself when he's working or when he's not. And look at the way he's organizing the head in relation to the neck. So we come to the definitions of sentences that normally should never be defined, apparently, according to modern Alexander technique teachers, because these words are, according to them, a description of a feeling that cannot be transmitted by words written or said. Well, I think differently, because it's what Alexander was watching for. If you think that the primary control is the lengthening of the stature of the torso, then suddenly, well, you can watch pictures and you can see whether a person is organizing the movements of the different parts of all the mechanism in such a way that the primary control, that is the central part, is organized to lengthen and widen. And if it's not, well, there is a problem in the conception of the movement. And the person must, well, use a technique of reconditioning. That's what I want to discuss. The fact that we have an idea of the primary control as being the lengthening of the stature, the expansion of the torso, if you want, the primary motive of every movement, as the Del South people were saying in the old days, then you must have a new view, a new perspective on what it is we are working with and how to recondition ourselves. I'm using the term reconditioning not because I invented it or because I like it. It's mostly because Alexander uses it. Yes? So Alexander, in the last podcast we had together, said that the wrong way of using himself was constituted a combined wrong use of the whole of his psychophysical, or he says physical mental mechanism. Why would he say physical mental mechanism? Well, when you make a decision of a movement, you're using a physical part of yourself. There is no problem in saying that I'm using my hand to raise to the screen, for example. There is no disconnection between myself and my hand, as some people imagine with the new somatic trend. No, I'm just making a decision to make a movement or not. And so this is the combined wrong use. You will see it when you watch different images of yourself. For example, you can film yourself, or you can take any picture on the internet. That's what I did. So to continue, I want to show you briefly an image, and we are going to discuss that image. We are going to see in what that image has an impact on the reconditioning process and what kind of reconditioning process we are involved in. So Alexander says, what we feel to be right is wrong. And before this habitual reflex activity can be changed, we need to pass through a series of reconditioning experiences, which, because they are previously unknown to us, at first feel wrong, and which must be repeated, therefore, until the unknown becomes the known and feels right and familiar. So this is not in the third book, this is in the fourth book. This is the last book Alexander wrote. This is the Universal Constant in Living. It's page 91. And I'm going to explain how I teach a modern Alexander teacher that wants to have lesson with me. It happens very often that modern Alexander teachers that have been teaching for many, many years come and try and have a lesson with me. And I may use that sentence because as you see on the picture on the left, it's obvious that we are in a teaching center for the modern Alexander technique. We have a teacher that is putting hands on a pupil, well, a student, and because the student is putting hands on a person, you must understand that this must be after the second year. So we have a third year student here. And when you look at the primary control in the way I do, well, you will find that there are problems because there is a marked shortening of the stature, not only of the student, but also of the teacher. And the teacher put that image on the internet to promote her school. So it means to me that she doesn't see what I see. She doesn't care for the lengthening or the expansion of the mechanism of the torso, because if she did, she would certainly not produce that sort of example, because we have here exactly all the mechanical defects, or Alexander say psycho-mechanical defects, that Alexander pointed in all his books. We see the protruding abdomen, we see the retracted upper torso, there is a shortening of the neck, and the head is pulled back relatively to the torso. So straight away, if I was to give a lesson to that teacher, why not? Yes, I would just ask her to observe that image and see whether she could, in fact, stop these movements that she feels to be right. The way she's lifting her hands and protruding the torso, the middle torso forward, arching the back, pulling the head back, is not conscious. She's not making decisions with the different parts of the torso in space. She's just doing according to a somatic reconditioning. So there are two kinds of reconditioning, in my view. There are the reconditioning experience, the one she had, because teachers using the same principle use their hands, that is using the hands to convey a sort of sensory experience of what is right. She's been through that. She has many lessons, and to my eyes, despite these experiences of what is right and trying to be right, trying to do the right thing, well, I can see that the torso is shortened. There is no question about that. It's not something subject to appreciation. You just look and you see that the front of the upper torso is very far backward, the middle of the torso, and that same middle front of the torso is very far forward of the front of her belt, meaning that she's arching. This is not the Alexander technique reconditioning, according to me. This is not the outcome of that process of coordination and readjustment Alexander was talking about. That person has not been reeducated in the sense that she's all still guided by her feelings. She has been transmitted and reconditioned in the feeling sense. Her sensory appreciation is still governing all her movements of the different parts of the torso. So the first thing is to study the evidence. is to film, is to present the person with a simple experiment of reconditioning. So that will, I will explain now, a completely different way to understand that word reconditioning. I'm not talking about a reconditioning by making the person feel what is right instead of what she's already doing, because that would mean that we are using exactly the same system, feeling sense, the same appreciation of what one feels when one is doing something, than the one that is provoking the problem that we see here. So I would ask the person simply to, in fact, make decisions. I will certainly not make her feel something. I would ask her to make decisions of movements. And first, I would ask her to reason so that before lifting the hands, because in fact, you cannot here disconnect the fact that she's really arching the back in this way when she's raising the hands to place the hands on top of the shoulder of the pupil that is in front of her. And the pupil herself is doing exactly the same thing. There is a copy. The pupil is the exact copy of the different movements of the parts of the torso of the teacher. So she's transmitting, apparently, the same misconception of what is the idea of lengthening and widening the back that she has to her student, to her pupil. So here, how do we recondition? Well, it's very simple. We ask the person to perform an activity without somebody to put hands on, of course. I just ask the person to, for example, lift the arms to touch the wall in front of her. I place the person in front of the wall and I say to her, could you please lift the arms? And the person has only one possibility, is to lift the arm according to what she feels as right. And she will do her best, because she's feeling, because I'm looking at her, and she will raise the hands as she always do, arching the back. And so the first thing is to ask her whether she could inhibit. What she's not trying to inhibit the feelings. She's not trying to inhibit the movement for the moment. For the moment, what we want her to inhibit is the connection between the command, lift the arms, because when the person is in front of the pupil, without ever vocalizing, of course, such a command, the person will tell herself, lift the hands. In her own mind, in her own subvocal speech, she will certainly not say, I will, in a moment, lift my hands. Well, she should. Because if she was saying this, then she could reason out, instead of feel out, how to, in fact, organize the mechanism of the torso in the raising of the hands. That's the primary principle. The person has to inhibit the habitual manner of using the torso when doing an activity where, of course, the torso is not the focus or the focal point, but the torso is the means whereby it will become possible to use the arms without a wrong functioning of the whole system. So the reconditioning is to start to promote movements of the mechanism of the torso that are primary to the lifting of the hands. What we mean by primary, of course, the lifting of the hands and the movements of the torso are going to happen at the same time. But what is primary is that we are more interested, when she's going to lift the torso, to look at the primary control and not at how she's lifting the hands properly or not. So we are not going to see whether the hands are fine, if they are fluid and soft. We don't care. She's going to lift the hand to touch the wall, so there is no problem. We are going to watch the primary control. I'm going to ask her to review her experiment looking at the video and then tell me what she sees. Is she protruding the middle torso? Is she pulling the upper torso backward as before? Is there a first movement of the shoulder back that is setting in action the whole series of wrong movements? And well, of course, you may be surprised by this, but yes, she is. She's not capable of preventing that for the moment. It's too strong, it's too habitual, it's something that is part of a way, of a manner of use. And the condition of use are all geared to allow that way of lifting the hands. So then we enter in the real reconditioning phase. I say to her, well, if you were not to pull the middle torso forward and the upper torso back to shorten the back, as you do most of the time, feeling right. Imagine that you're starting to have the middle torso go back and the upper torso going forward. You're going to feel absolutely wrong. You're going to have the impression of pulling, of stretching, tensing, doing all these things that you have tried to prevent yourself from feeling. Because your business of your concept of non-doing is all based on what you want to feel. You want to feel no tension. You want to feel no stress. Well, I'm asking you, in fact, to do exactly the opposite. To, in fact, go against that like axiom that you should feel ease, that you should feel right. What is right? I'm just saying that for the moment, according to what we see on screen, when we look at your activity, when you just lift the hands forward, at the moment, the movement of the hands forward goes with the middle torso forward and the upper torso goes back. So would it be possible for you to, in fact, decide to feel wrong? This is the massive reconditioning the initial Alexander technique is about. There is no other reconditioning than this one, and there is no other re-education than this one. We've been educated to believe that what we feel, if the pot is hot, it is hot. It works with the pot. Yes, it works with heat. But with concerted movements of the parts of the torso, it's absolutely insane. It does not apply. And it's easy easy in the sense that the evidence is on screen. I'm not asking the person to see or to feel what she's doing when she's doing it. I'm asking the person to lift the hands and decide that no, she's not going to go forward with the middle torso and back with the upper torso. We are very clear that the inhibition is a certain inhibition of movements. And at first, again, it may be surprising to hear this, but if you look on screen at slow motion, you will find that no, the person is not capable yet. Yes, the decision has to, in fact, break a barrier, and the barrier is the feeling sense. The person has to feel wrong. So often I have got a question like, but you really want me to feel that wrong? That on screen, I start to have the upper torso go forward and the middle torso go back? Yes, yes. This is exactly the reconditioning I'm talking about. And yes, we are going to judge this, and judge is a strong word here. Not by the experience you get. No, we judge the experiment by the lengthening or the shortening of the torso when you look at you. So this is central. There is a first stage. The first stage is discovering that, yes, we've been trained by a somatic way where people thought that they had the correct understanding because they had the correct feeling, because they had been reconditioned in the experience sense that they felt the new thing that the teacher wanted them to feel. And they thought that because of that, they could trust their sensory appreciation. All the pictures I'm looking at, where you will see some teachers that are doing some movements, you will find that we find always the same kind of picture. We have a teacher that is promoting her work on the net, and again, she's putting hands on a person, and we can see, well, everything. The upper torso is brought back, the shoulders are lifted and brought back, there is no way you could well, imagine that the neck can be free when the shoulders are that high and that far back. There is the shortening of the back and the protruding abdomen, just to raise the hand in front of her. So Alexander is quite clear. He says, hence, as a result of reasoning along these lines, we, on the receipt of any stimulus to activity, make the important decision not to give consent to doing anything in response, as this doing will be due to our projection of the habitual messages which have led us into wrongness. Well, this sentence, I think, has made as much damage as enlightened some. So I need to stop a second. So at the moment, we are in the business of reasoning. It's not the point that the teacher has been trained 20 years ago and has been teaching for 20 years with great success, making people feel extraordinary lift. What people feel is not the problem. We want to see whether the mechanism of the torso is expanding or not. And we can see again in these images that it's absolutely obvious that the teacher is shortening, that she's protruding the belly and pulling back. And in this sense, it's impossible to have the head forward and up. Impossible. So when we observe this, when we reason along these lines, which is what is the primary control? The primary control is the primary motive of movement. It's the expansion of the torso. When there is no expansion of the torso, well, it's no point saying that, well, it doesn't matter. Well, it's not that a problem, because that person could have the neck free when the torso is in such condition, which goes against everything Alexander said. No, for the moment, I don't mind playing the bad guy and saying to the person, when you look at yourself on screen, do you think that the torso is expanding or shortening? And I explain what we mean by expanding, what Alexander meant by expanding, by showing pictures and by showing sentences where I explain what he means by lengthening the back or lengthening the spine. This is not a picture of a teacher that is lifting the hand while lengthening the spine. Certainly not. This is shortening the spine. And most teachers will agree. Well, not most of them, but a large a portion of the teachers that had lesson with me of the modern Alexander technique, they had one or two, and then they stopped because they didn't want to hear this. They wanted to hear that they could improve somehow what they have already got. They were mostly interested in improving the use of the hands. Well, I do not teach how to improve the mechanism of the hands other than by improving the use and control of the mechanism of the torso. So from there is very little chance that we can work together. Only the teacher that starts to reason on these lines, well, find an interest in going against the habit, in going against the sensory somatic evidence. Well, it means, as I did myself in my days, that you have to reconsider. What is the source of your expertise? What is really teaching the initial Alexander technique, as Alexander, I think, was teaching it. It's a painful moment when you find out that you invested so much. Of course, you have received a lot because you had some power of being a good teacher, of being a teacher capable of producing a fantastic feeling experience. Yes, but what about the bottom line? Are we really helping people to organize themselves when in fact they are still guided by their feelings, and when they feel that they are doing right? And when you observe the film, you see that, well, no, it's not the case. It's a question. I live it. to you to decide. So the important decision not to give consent to the habitual way of doing according to feeling. This is what I understand when Alexander makes this proposition of the basic components of his reconditioning technique. The first thing is inhibition of the habitual way. And in activities like lifting the hands, like going to stand, I just, for example, there are senior teachers. They come to me and they spend lessons after lesson in a movement like leaning. How to lean forward or backward. This may seem completely impossible, but it's the truth. I make them understand that leaning forward or backward and interfering with the mechanism of the torso is not what we want. And it's what is happening. It's what we see on screen. So we cannot accept, so we refuse. We refuse to see it. I don't care for quick results. It's not, I'm not here to make the person good or make the person feel ease right now. No, most of the time people don't feel ease whenever they have a lesson. You can testify, I think, Kevin. Yes, it's always a nasty business to reconsider our manner of use. It's this idea of ease and finding the ease and receiving the ease. Well, not for me, certainly. So Alexander is saying that the habitual doing is due to a projection of habitual messages. This is not absolutely clear or evident because most people do not realize that if we see them with the middle torso protruding forward and the upper torso going back, the head pulls back, the back narrowed, it's because they have done some movements. And Alexander suggests that they have done these movements purposefully. I'm not going that far. These people have done these movements, but not realizing they were doing so because their guidance of the mechanism of the torso is not conscious. They're not giving themselves instructions to move the different parts of the torso. They are saying, let the neck be free. Let the head go forward and up. Let the back lengthen and widen. Let the back lengthen and widen. Take that. What does it mean, let the back lengthen and widen? For them, it means a logical conclusion of having some sort of attention to the head and neck. Yes. Well, when we watch the evidence of the video, we see that the person is not lengthening and widening the back. But she believes she is. Or she believes, what is even worse, she believes that it will happen someday if she continues to direct the head forward and up and the neck to release. She's after a myth that something may happen only by itself because of the primary control definition in their system of teaching. That's what the person has been told. She's been told that, no, for the moment, yes, she's shortening the back. But if she continues to release, to think of releasing the neck and not doing it, to think of letting the head go forward and not doing it, somehow the back will lengthen and widen. It was a day I was in exactly the same frame of mind until I started to watch videos after videos of myself shortening the back. And I decided to use orders, messages, conscious messages, objective messages. I will tell myself that I did not want the middle torso to go forward and the upper torso to go back when I was lifting the hands, because I was doing exactly the same thing as the poor teachers I'm showing here. These people are just exactly like me. But they were, at the time, not using messages consciously. The guidance of these movements is according to a general feeling that should be right because they're thinking of letting the neck be free and the head go forward and up. To my eyes, this is still not working. And I like it when I teach modern Alexander technique teachers that has had, I don't know, 30 years of practice, because I go by what we see on screen. And I want to discover one day somebody that's through that technique of thinking that the neck is free, the head goes forward and up, and the back lengthen and widen, then we will see the back lengthen and widen truly. I haven't seen it yet. And so I have no personal, anger at any teacher. It's just that I'm just facing the facts, and I'm asking people to face the facts with me and recondition themselves by, in fact, deciding that they are going to go against the somatic cognition. That is the basis of their guidance and also the basis of their control. I want them to control through video, and I want them to guide themselves with messages. But this time, the messages are conscious. The messages are reason. Yes? So Alexander says that by this inhibition, the first inhibition thing, I'm refusing to go into activity according to it's going to happen by itself. The right thing will do itself. No, the right thing will not do itself. I am asking the person to really project messages of movements. There are messages you will see of inhibitions of movements. I say to the person, could it be possible for you not to move the upper torso backward in space, relatively to the middle torso? I ask the person to, in fact, even place the hands on the parts, so that the person has even here the somatic feeling helping, because the person has no idea that she's doing this. She has no feeling awareness. The whole business of developing the feeling sense does not work. Does not. The person does not feel she's doing what she's doing. She's protruding, she's shortening, everything is wrong. And the person thinks that she's doing right because her somatic cognition is telling us that's it. You're at ease. Well, I don't care if you're at ease when you're shortening the mechanism of the torso. It's not the point. So if you feel absolutely wrong and are seen to lengthen the torso, well, you're getting an idea of what Alexander means by correct tension. The feeling of ease is the worst guide to get the real sense of neck free, head forward and up, back to lengthen and widen. These results will never come through the feeling sense. So many people think that Alexander said that inhibition is primary. Yes, he did say that. But the problem in reading Alexander is that it's not the only sentence. The sentence is followed by other ones. And if you do not read the whole process that is describing the principle, well, you are going to have many ideas. But these ideas are not how Alexander constructs his principle. No, they're not. It's necessary to learn to read, apparently. It's not sufficient to read. We need to see how we are reading, how we are connecting the different parts of a reasoning. Alexander is not just writing what is right. He's showing us how he reasons. And so if you don't follow the reasoning, construction, you cannot get at what he is aiming. It's not that easy. You have to train yourself, and you have to, in fact, go above your primary reaction. Oh, yes, I like this passage. Oh, I dislike that. Oh, dear, the words he's using are offensive. Yes, and what? It does not help you to understand the reasoning at all, or to even discover that there is a reasoning in his books. Yes, Alexander is that sort of person. So, once again, when we read Alexander, again, that's this idea of initial inhibition. He says by this initial inhibition, change becomes possible. And we pass on to consider what should be our next procedure. Primarily, our concern must be to find out in what way we are interfering with the right employment of the primary control, and decide to prevent this interference by consciously refusing to project the messages which habitually bring it about. Only secondarily are we interested in the projection of the new messages, which will, in time, lead us indirectly, that is through a change in the employment of the primary control over your use, to the change we desire in our habitual reflex activity. Well, there are many ways to read these sentences. The first thing is the initial inhibition. The initial inhibition makes change possible. Has change happened when this initial inhibition has been made? No. The person, you have to understand, has a habit of performing wrong movements which shorten the mechanism of the torso. So you see here a teacher that is teaching the hands on the back of a chair, a very basic procedure that we use in order for the person to recondition our dependence on feeling. Yes, and what we see is that, of course, she's teaching that, but what about the primary control? As I see it, the primary control is not the head and neck relationship. I don't care for that. I put a blur on it so that nobody can recognize who the teacher is that is posting these images on the net. But when she's posting these images on the net, what I see is how the mechanism of the torso is organized, just by reaching forward with the hands. And you can see very, very clearly that the shoulder blades are protruding at the back, that the middle chest is very, very far forward, and the arch in the lower back, the shortening and narrowing of the lower back is extreme. This is horrendous. Yes? There is no association whatsoever between the movement of the arm and the different movements of the mechanism of the torso. This person is very concerned in her hands, in the way are they fluid, are they nice? She's maybe very concerned about her neck, but her way of checking whether the neck is free or not is astonishing. You must understand that the spine, well, the cervical spine that we call the neck, is the extremity of the thoracic spine, which is itself related with the lumbar spine. Do you think that the neck can be free when the person is shortening the spine that way, that much? It makes no sense. Yes, the neck is not free because the person is using the mechanism of the torso in this way. It will never be free if the person continues to use the mechanism of the torso in this way. And saying that the neck is free is never going to change anything of the primary control. In 10 years, 15 years time, we're going to look at this person putting hands on someone else, and we will see that when she reaches forward, despite all the neck free at forward and up and back to lengthen she has repeated, despite all the other lessons that she can take from expert manipulators, the basic reconditioning of deciding to promote movements, a series of movements according to definite messages, definite orders, will not have started. That person may be renowned, maybe everything. Many people will tell you that this person has fantastic hands and is capable of promoting such a delightful experience and brings some immense ease into the person she's working with. I don't care, because for me, this sounds like a lie. You know, there is a problem here is how could a person that is misusing herself so much bring a correct experience? She can bring a very potent feeling stimuli. She can really impress the pupil with her appearance of use, with her philosophy of use and non-doing. She may really wrap her mind with, well, all sorts of suggestion. Yes, but the primary use of the mechanism of the torso is absolutely wrong. And that is what she's going to transmit to that person. To me, this is not teaching the initial Alexander technique. It's not teaching conscious guidance and control at all. So, of course, this is not pleasant to hear. Very often people would, well, react very strongly, but I don't hide the truth. I just tell it as I think it is. It's just basic. We have to reason from facts. We have to reason from what we see. So Alexander says, the initial inhibition makes change possible. I say, yes, but change has not happened. We have to use the primary element with a secondary one. And if you have only the primary one, well, you're nowhere. Just inhibiting is not making you any better at organizing the movement of the hands with the different movements of the parts of the torso so that you're seen to lengthen and widen. No. So when I read this, I say, well, we must find out in what way we are interfering with the right employment of the primary control. Well, it depends on what you mean by primary control. If you mean that the primary control is the first part of a sentence where Alexander says that it's the relationship between the head and neck, that's where you are. I'm saying differently. I'm saying very differently. I'm saying that for me, the primary control is the manner of use of the mechanism of the torso. It's the first thing I will watch. For example, I teach the use of the feet, an ankle and leg. When I ask a person to perform a movement, a coordinated movement with these different parts, I don't look at the feet or the legs or the knees. I look at the mechanism of the torso. How is the person going to change her use of the feet? Is for me just measured by how she's able to produce the new movement of the feet as I request with the correct movement of the parts of the torso. And most often, you will find that during the lesson, I do not object to the way the person is moving the feet, the parts of the feet and ankles and toes and leg. No, I am always referring to what we see happening with the different movements of the parts of the torso. And the idea is, well, of course, to try and improve the organization of the mechanism we are considering, which is the support of the legs. But this has only an interest in us because in this way, we can link up the movement of the parts of the extremities, the mechanism of the feet, link up this movement with the movement of the different parts of the mechanism of the torso. This is really following the text exactly as is laid out. Well, that's difficult because it's exactly as I read it, you must understand, yes? So we consciously refuse to project some messages, but there are the question of we are interested in the projection of the new messages, which will in time lead us indirectly, that is through a change in the employment of the primary control, the use of, for me, the use of the mechanism of the torso, to the change we desire. So the change we desire is not to change the mechanism, for example, with the feet, is not to change how the person goes up on the toes. It's how the person goes up on the toes and organize the mechanism of the torso at the same time. There is no possibility to improve the mechanism of the feet in the very fundamental way when the mechanism of the feet is improved at the expense of the organization of the mechanism of the torso. It makes no sense, because the major systems that are producing antagonistic pulls in the feet, well, all these major mechanisms originate in the mechanism of the torso. So you can become quite good at moving the feet. I've seen some dancers that were able to go up on the toes, doing what we call a demi-pointe, which is the full extension. But when this is happening at the expense of the movements of the different parts of the torso, because these people have no idea how they should be related, well, you will find that the success are really momentary. The person will at first be able to do it, but then it will become more and more difficult to, in fact, get the same result she had before. She will not improve. So when you're doing something very well at one point and you discover that suddenly, for some reason, your performance is declining, that's quite interesting. That's quite interesting. Experience makes perfect? I don't think so. Experiments of conscious guidance, including that mechanism that we call the control, the primary control, that yes, leads to improvement. But when there is no improvement, when there is this glass ceiling, yes, you must think that there must be a problem of coordination between the different mechanisms. So it's one thing to read a sentence. It's a different thing to, in fact, start to reason about it. So here, Alexander is saying, our first concern must be to find out in what way we are interfering with the right employment of the primary control. And I have here a very difficult subject to broach. So I hope that all the teachers that hate me will have gone for now. And this is the sort of reasoning I am following. So I have a model on the left, and that model is exactly based on a photograph of Alexander. I wanted to see how he was organizing the mechanism of the torso above the ankle when he was standing. And this astonishing image comes out. It's a diagram, you know? And so I wanted to compare in what way we are interfering with the mechanism of the torso supposes that you have an idea of what you want, how you want the mechanism of the torso to be organized. You need an idea of a correct organization to start to understand what is incorrect. That was my point. And so I'm presenting two different images. Of course, there are, Alexander teachers. One on the left is Frederick Macias Alexander, and the one on the right is Pat MacDonald in the, 10 years after Alexander's death. And it's quite interesting because their conception of the primary control is absolutely not the same. Pat MacDonald is the one that thought that the primary control is really the connection between the head and neck. Alexander, in my sense, thinks that the primary control is the use of the mechanism of the torso. And so when we look at the two images, there is a striking difference. Pat MacDonald is not interested in very much in the organization of the upper torso, middle torso, and lower torso. This is a well-known teacher here, but Pat MacDonald here is making a promotional video. Why would he not reorganize the mechanism of the torso as a first target? Why would he not show us what is the reorganization of the mechanism of the torso? Well, he does not because he's not interested. He's interested in a certain relationship between the head and neck. His hands are nearly never letting go of that very peculiar region, as if everything would follow up from there. And if there is a sharp misuse, if the back is really shortened, the belly protruding, if everything seems to be wrong on the torso, it's not his point. He does not believe that this is a problem. His conception of what is the correct use of the primary control is not the same. Well, we see that Alexander, all the lesson with that young Irish gentleman is striving and making everything he does with his hands to organize the upper torso relatively to the middle torso, so that in the end we get a very peculiar image that is exactly the same as the one he's showing Alexander himself when he's standing. Yes, his conception of the lengthening of the back, well, it's completely different from the conception of lengthening of the back of Patrick MacDonald. And Patrick MacDonald, to me, is really the forefather of the modern Alexander technique. It's Walter Carrington said that he learned how to use his hands with Pat MacDonald. Alexander was not teaching them that. He made a group with 3 other teachers, and they were the fer de lance, the new Alexander technique, the neck and head relationship with the back. Everybody says that Patrick MacDonald had found wonderful hands. Yes, maybe. I never had a lesson with him. I had a lesson with many of his teachers, but there is one thing that is absolutely clear, is that he never tried to transmit the conception of the primary control in the way we can discover in the books. It's completely different. If you look at the position of the head relative to the middle torso, you will find that, well, it's absolutely obvious that one is very far forward and the other is very far back. Simple. You have to make your own experiments. I just say to people, well, fine. Maybe you believe in the neck-head relationship, but could you organize the movements? Because if your technique is good, well, I can give you some message to project together all at the same time, what Mr. Dewey called the thinking in activity. And could you inhibit some movements and promote other, so that we see a new coordination of the mechanism of the torso? The experiment is the test. For the moment, the modern Alexander technique does not give people the capacity to organize a series of movements together. It's as simple as that. They can repeat what they know, what they felt, what they feel is right, but they cannot consciously organize the movement in order to promote a new organization of the mechanism of the torso. And I'm just saying, well, it's quite interesting to experiment with it, to observe. So I invite everybody to have a test, have a lesson with me and see how this is going. And for people that have never encountered the Alexander technique before, I'm just saying that this is a reason approach. We look at what the person is exactly doing when the person is sitting and standing, how these different movements affect the breathing mechanism, the digestive mechanism, and the motor system as a whole. How easy the person can perform some equilibrium task like sitting to standing or standing to sitting or going up on the toes. And we can, well, easily show that the habitual somatic cognition is very poor. We are very badly discoordinated. It's easy to show. Simple experiment, we show that I cannot go up on my toes and stay 2 minutes without producing enormous efforts, enormous movements, which most of the time can be shown very clearly as being contrary to the expansion of the mechanism of the torso. We can pinpoint that easily, and the person will discover quite simply that reorganizing the movement of the parts of the torso will make them go up on their toes with horrendous feelings, I agree, but with fantastic ease. So in that sense, ease is very different from feelings. So this is a completely different way of, well, understanding the primary control. It has its value. You can read the Alexander's books, and with this definition in mind. Could it be possible? Well, you can try. Every time Alexander is talking about primary control, just in your mind, test to see if it could mix with this idea of the lengthening of the stature of the torso as a translation. You make up your mind. That's it.
Brilliant, thank you,
For today.
Jeando. I will add some quotes about the primary control from the books to this part of the video so people can experiment with what you've just said. And for everybody who wants to book a lesson with Jeando, which I recommend very highly, you will find a link to his websites underneath the video. And we will see you in the next video. So thank you a lot, Jeando.
Well, thank you. Thanks to you.